Hello, and welcome to NotesIn9. I'm David Leedy, and this is an extended edition. Extended Episode 6, XPages, Beyond the Introduction. Okay, I wanted to talk quickly about this show because, quite frankly, this is a long one. This is going to run about 60 minutes, give or take. It's going to start out slightly slow with a couple extra slides, but then we're going to get hot and heavy into lots of demos. What this video is, this is really part two in my mind. It's a sequel. So the first video that I did a while back, the first big one, was Introduction to XPages, and that was about 73 minutes, and that's available on XPages TV and NotesIn9.com, and that's one that I did for a video fest basically. And what this is basically the continuation of that. So that's why I call it Beyond the Introduction. So put together, both these videos in my mind is almost a full XPages jumpstart, running about, give or take 2 hours and stuff like that. So that's what this is. So if you haven't seen the first one and you're interested, go see that. But this is the better one. It's gonna be a lot better demos and a lot more advanced stuff in here. I do want to take a quick moment to thank Jeremy Hodge and Zeta1.com, who's going to be coming on board to sponsor NotesIn9. And what that means is they're going to build me a new website. I have a lot of pain in the back end publishing of the screencast, and they're going to make the pain go away. So I'm quite frankly very excited for that to happen. Okay, so did I mention demos earlier? I think I did. So where are these demos going to be? XPagesCheatSheet.com is this new domain that I made to hold the XPages cheat sheet, which I compiled from my own sources and community sources. But I'm going to make a demo database, and all these demos that you're going to see here are going to be available for download on XPagesCheatSheet.com. And as Notes9 continues on, I'm going to try and further enhance this demo database with as many demos as makes sense to put in there. Okay, so let's kind of get on with the show. We're going to talk about custom controls and UI frameworks, and this is kind of like the I've done this before for talking about Blueprint, CSS, and One UI and stuff like that. So even though I've done it before, I wanted to do it here because this is kind of like a jump start. So that's going to be like the beginning. Then we're going to get into some all new stuff: data binding, some server-side JavaScript, Dojo, a lot on repeat controls, rendering, and then what I like to call the big finish, where I'm going to tie a lot of these things together. Okay, so custom controls, what are they? Well, custom controls are like the building blocks of XPages. They're like the Lego bricks of making an XPages website. So they're kind of like a subform, but better. And why are they better? They're better because they're reusable. They're better because they can take parameters. So you can define your own parameters for a custom control and pass that in, and that will change the appearance or the effect of the custom control at runtime. And you're going to see that in the end of this video. They're very useful for content areas. So sometimes these web pages can get kind of big and there's a lot going on there. So what you can do is you can break down your page or your app into just small little blocks, and then you just work on a block at a time, and then just drop them together on other custom controls or on XPages, and you're good to go. So that makes it a little easier to work with. They're very good for your layout structure, which I'm going to demonstrate here, your navigation framework. So that's a great use for them. Now, when we talk about frameworks, a lot of times we talk about CSS frameworks, and one of them that comes with your Domino server is One UI, and this is IBM's standard framework, not just for Domino, for all their websites, and it's kind of neat actually. Again, it comes with Notes and Domino. One of the neat things about it is there's very good documentation available on it. There's a website which I should have put the link on here, but apparently I didn't. But if you Google it and you find Google One UI documentation, I'm sure you'll find it or so, and it's got all this good documentation, all these examples. But interestingly, the website doesn't use One UI itself, which is kind of odd, but it is what it is. It's great. It's a great resource. One of the killer features of One UI is that it's very easy to go from a left to right reading to right to left. So if you're dealing with some of the other some languages that do that, then you want to use One UI and just be done with it. It also gives you a common feel to all your websites, so they all look alike, if that's what you want. But if you do, then they're all looking like. So then there's lots of examples available as well. So a lot of the projects on OpenNTF are using One UI. We're getting some templates out of the box, like the discussion template and things like that. It's all One UI based. If you want to get into the extension library, One UI may be a requirement. I haven't looked at this too heavily yet or so, but I think it kind of assumes you're using One UI, and if not, and you want to restyle it, then you might have some extra work to do. But again, that's hearsay, so that's what I'm led to believe. So there's a lot of good to One UI, but I still don't like it. I think it's a little big. I think as a Notes client developer, I'd rather learn CSS itself than One UI. But I'm going to have to learn One UI and just suck it up one day. But that day isn't today. Okay, today is Blueprint Day. So let's just talk quickly about Blueprint, which is another free CSS framework that I like. It's very light, so there's not a lot of bloat to it. There's not a lot of additional stylings that you're not going to use. It has a great grid system, which is the reason to use Blueprint. It breaks your web page down to 24 columns, and it kind of makes it very easy to move things around on your page. It's cross-browser compatible, and it's free. The main Blueprint files that when you download the package is a reset CSS, grid, typography, and forms. And you can use one or all, or I guess you want to use at least one, or otherwise why bother with Blueprint. But all these files, these four, are compressed into screen.css, which is misspelled here, even though I've practiced this probably 7 times. I keep forgetting to fix that spelling. But anyway, there's screen.css, which removes all the white space, and it just is better to send down to the browser. There's some additional files in Blueprint. There's an IE hack file. There's grid.png, which is a way to see the grid as you're developing and designing, testing out your web page, and you'll see that in a second. So to install Blueprint, you want to import the Blueprint files that you're going to use as resources. What I like to do is create another CSS file called applications.css for my own custom styling for the app, and then I want to create a theme. And what the theme does is it's like a global, use these CSS files for all my pages, so I won't have to remember to put the CSS files on each page. Now, there's good and bad about that. One is I don't have to remember to put the CSS files on each page because I forget things. The bad thing is if you use a theme, then as you design in Domino Designer, it doesn't try to render the theme at design time. Whereas if you add the CSS files to each page or resource, it will actually try to render that at design time. So it's kind of like a trade-off. So the way you create a theme is you need to, create it, and then you go into your application properties and say, your application theme, whatever you name it, in the little drop down there. So what does a theme look like? Well, kind of looks like this. The most important thing about a theme is to extend a server theme. And there's basically 2 that come with you. So you've got the web standard and One UI. Now, if you want to use One UI, use One UI and forget about Blueprint. But web standard is a little more of a basic one. And the reason why you want to extend web standard is because it has theming that makes some of the Dojo pieces of XPages work, like the date and time picker, etc. So you just want to extend that, and then you have that available to you. So then you add some resource sections like you see here. So here's the screen.css. The next block is actually, you can use server-side JavaScript inside a theme, and basically if the browser is IE6, then use this IE.css file. And then finally there's the application CSS file. So it's not very scary. It's not that difficult. Okay, using Blueprint within XPages, it's a very good fit. What I like to do is in my custom controls, that's where I put my content in there. And it could be a view, it could be a repeat, it could be graphics or so. And inside the content, I'm going to use a panel or a div. A div would perform better than a panel. And then I apply the Blueprint styling to that div. So if I want to say span 16, that it's going to mean it's going to be 16 columns wide. Prepend 4 means move it 4, over from left to right, etc. So that's kind of how you can move your content around on the page. There's also styling available for forms and typography, etc. And then there's a special style called last. So if you have span 24 last, that means the next content area that it sees, move that underneath it. And we're going to see that right now in this graphic. So here's a screenshot of a little web page, and you can see each column, and that's because I turned show grid on. Show grid is a style that uses that grid.png to show me what the columns look like. So if we look at the source here, everything is nested in this container. And again, I'm using panel. Divs would probably be better in this case, but panels draw a box on the designer screen, and I kind of like that. So that's why I'm using panels here. So we have this container panel, which is what everything inside Blueprint needs to go in. Then the next one is span 24 last, and that's the header of the page, basically. And then as we come down here, we can see the span 6 test, and test means green. I don't know why I didn't name it green. That probably would have made more sense. Span 12, etc. So you can just kind of see how you can place content on the page, and it works, and it works very well with XPages. So what do? Well, to get your navigation working, your headers and your sidebars and stuff like that, you're going to create a custom control for each section. Okay, and then you create this master custom control, master layout that holds each of those sections. So a lot of times when you're working with XPages and these web pages, you do a lot of nesting or so. So we're going to create this master custom control to hold each of the headers and the footers and the sidebars and stuff like that. And on this master custom control, we're going to put an editable area or a facet where the main content is going to go. Then for each main page, that's going to be a custom control itself. And you're going to see all this in a second here. Okay, and then finally, we create a new X page. We add the master layout custom control to the X page, which gives us all our framing and stuff like that. And then we drop the custom control onto that green dot or that editable area. Okay, so let's look at a demo here. Okay, so let's look at this. So here is my bar top. This is my custom control that just gives me the header of my page. Okay, actually, let's look at it first. So here's what the app looks like. Okay, so here's this header. And how does this header work? Well, if we come down here to our first panel, we're going to see it's styling of span 24 last. Okay, and then the left one has a similar concept going on, but this is just span 4, and it's not last. Okay, so that's how the custom controls are kind of laid out. Then what I have is layout main, and what this does, and we'll look at this in the source, is this is where my container panel is, and then I drop in my top custom control, I drop in the left custom control, and then I've got this callback or this facet, which we see here down here. And what that is the, and if we look at it, an editable area that was dropped down here. Okay, and then how does this work? Well, what I do is I create a new X page. Just now, and we go to our custom controls, and we find our layout main. Here it is. And then what we do is for our content custom controls, here's one that says new content. Then what we want to do here is we'll add a panel. And again, well, we'll do div in this case. And we're going to style it. Okay, so we're going to say, now we know the left sidebar takes up 4, so we'll do span 20, because it's 24 column based, last. And then we'll put our content inside of it. Oh, not the view though. Oops, and we don't need to print it either. And we'll say save. Okay, and then in this new X page where we dropped our layout main, we will find this new content and drop this right on the green dot, and then preview this in our web browser. And it'll fit nicely in here. Okay, and that's all you do with with your blueprint navigation. So you make each page that way. There'll be only, if you need to change your title, there's only one place to do it, or your sidebar, and that's kind of how you build pages. Okay, let's talk about data binding. So this is a great thing you can do in XPages where you can bind data to different databases. You cannot just do different databases, but even in the same database, or any really, you can bind multiple things to your page. So you can bind multiple documents, even multiple notes views. And this is a big difference from classic notes development where you only ever had one form per one document. So where do you bind this data? Well, you can bind it at different levels in your X page. You can bind at your X page itself, at the custom control, at a container control like a panel or a repeat. So you can put these bindings many different places, but you do want to be careful because the lower you bind, the more difficult it is to actually find it later. So the outline control does help for this or so, but if you're looking for it, it may be bound at a lower level. So I like to bind as high as I can to the X page or the custom control itself, and then have the container controls just kind of point to that. But you do have some flexibility, but sometimes it does get hard to find. What I really end up doing a lot of times is I do a lot of external binding, which is really cool because you can finally compute the database, which you couldn't really do beforehand. So how do you compute the database? Well, with a relatively simple formula: session.getDatabase, database.getServer, etc. Then your file name. But that didn't work for me back in 851 consistently in the Notes client. So I had to come up with this kind of uglier, more old-fashioned formula of at name, common name, at subset, DB name, bang bang, etc. So that seemed to work better. And I've not tried that. I assume that bug's been fixed in 852, but I'm not 100% sure. So it's a little more work to do this. So why would you want to do that? Well, it's kind of nice having an application that only has XPages code and no data. And it's really nice if you're starting to slowly migrate an existing Notes client application to XPages. So you don't need to just do a full rip and replace. You can do it very slowly and controlled. What I've been doing is I've been taking a Notes client application and just slowly adding new features to it through a separate XPage database. It's kind of very nice to do that. You're doing it in small chunks, small bites, than trying to do it all at once. So let's look at it. Let's look at this. So this data comes from a foreign database, so it's not inside this cheat sheet.nsf. And it's just a typical view control. And we also have the ability to kind of like do this like live filtering thing, which is kind of fun. Okay, so let's see how this works. Okay, so what this is custom control. If we look at data, and try to make this a little bigger, we can see that this is computed, the database and the view. And if we look at it, it's basically the same formula from the slide. That's all there is to it. So we're reaching into another database and computing that database value. And here we're computing the view value of just simple by name. Okay, now, but here's the trick. You can't use the wizards to use in the view control when you're binding to a foreign database. It doesn't work. So how do you do that? Because quite honestly, I'm not typing all that stuff in. So what you do is you cheat. So if you go to the foreign database and you have an X page, let's say you have an X page and you create the view control inside here where you can use the wizard. And then what you do is simply select the whole view control, and copy. And then you come back into the database you want to use it, go into source and then just paste it in. Which I'm not going to do now because that'll break everything. And it's just going to work. As long as in the view control, let me get back there. As long as in the view control you use basically the same vars. Now I'm getting lost. So if we go to this view control here, and we can see this, the value here is view 1. So as long as that name stays the same, then you can just paste it in and everything's going to work. So now how does this filtering work? Well, if you look at this box here, this quick search, well, what I'm doing here is I'm binding the value of quick search to a view scope variable. That's it. So as you type this, it's going to save into the view scope. How is it going to save? Well, there's an event here on key up, and all on key up does is does a partial refresh of the view panel. Okay, so this is bound to a view scope variable, and as you type for every letter where the key goes up, then we're going to do a partial refresh of the view panel. And then if we look at our data source, there is, for this view, filter by column value, and that's computed. And what is that? It's basically just reads in that view scope variable, and that's it. So with basically 2 lines of code, we're getting live filtering. I mean, it's just that easy. So that's kind of cool. And that is binding to a foreign database. Okay, so let's talk about server-side JavaScript. It is a fact that JavaScript is the language of choice in XPages. It is not Lotus script, so we're gonna say goodbye to Lotus script for the most part. But we're not gonna be afraid, because JavaScript is just a slightly different syntax. You can do a lot of the same things in Lotus script. In JavaScript, but it's actually better. It's better than Lotus script because it's several languages in one. You can combine things better than you can combine in Lotus script. So what do we get? We get the JavaScript syntax, which is really, it's not really JavaScript, it's ECMAScript. So it's basically just the syntax. It's not full JavaScript because you don't have access to the DOM model and things like that on the server side like you would in pure JavaScript. We also get at formulas. Not every at formula, but many of them have been basically rewritten from scratch. So there's no reason not to use them. There's no penalty in performance. They're really rewritten in basically Java objects on the back end side. We also have domino backend objects like we've always had in Lotus script. So those are still there. And we additionally gain the ability to use pure Java objects. So I say JavaScript is the language of choice. Java is pretty close to that too. And if you don't know Java, don't panic, because we're not talking about necessarily the full Java syntax, but maybe just the ability to use Java objects where there are some needs, and then I might have a demo of that coming up as well. So a good resource for syntax help for JavaScript is w3schools.com. So let's see what this looks like. Well, here's an example of some server-side JavaScript where we're mixing languages. So this is just a snippet of a bigger piece of code. But what this is an if-then statement. If key is a certain length. So I'm basically testing whether I pass in key it's a unit or it's like an at unique or a document level key. So how do I do this test? Well, I do it on length, but I didn't know how to do test for length in JavaScript. And interestingly enough, I didn't need to know how to do it because we have at length like we always had in that formula language. So if the length of key is greater than 15, I'm saying, okay, this is going to be a unit. And then I set my variables. So var is like a dim statement, and you always want to use a var. Never forget the var. It has to do with scoping the object or so, and if you forget the var, it's gonna ruin your day. Trust me on that. I've lost a couple days to that. So var unit equals key. Okay, that's simple. Now the next line, tdoc. Okay, I'm creating a notes document. Now the colon notes document portion, that's optional, but it's something you want to do because that will tell the editor what to use for type ahead. So it'll give you type ahead, and it'll give you some other slightly additional checking. So you want to use those objects. Now database is not pre-declared. I've not dimmed that anywhere because database is a global object. Database and session are just always there for you. So I'm saying var tdoc notes document equals database get document by unit. And passing the unit. So I'm getting a handle of the actual notes document. Now, just take a note where if you're binding to foreign databases, the global database is your current database and not the foreign one. So you'd have to kind of get a handle to the foreign database manually, which is the same basic way you do that in Lotus script. And then you just go on. And this is not that difficult to read for a Lotus script programmer, I wouldn't think. And that's kind of what it looks like. So let's kind of see another demo of this. So if we go to our JavaScript page, I've got two fields here, and I've got a computed field here. So it's calculating the days until Christmas. And if I click on Click Me, it's going to say that is not August, which, as I film this, it is technically not August. And it reiterates to me that it is still not August. August was because IMlug is in August, and that's when I did this original demo. So let's see what this looks like. Okay, so if we just close out of these and clean up, go into our JavaScript. That's the page. We want to go to the custom control. Here it is. Okay, so you can see our two fields and our computed field. So if we look at what's going on in this Click Me button here, and I expand this, again, I'm mixing the syntax of JavaScript with at formulas. So the first thing I do is I declare a month, and I'm saying, what is month? Well, it's the month version of at today. Okay, just like you would expect. Now, there's a little different syntax. The capitalization is important, and you need to have these little parentheses and stuff like that, but it's not rocket science. And then if month equals, this means equals, single equal means assignment. So if month is 8, then what I'm doing for the first field is I'm binding to the view scope. So view scope put in a variable named value, August. And then for the second control there, I'm not doing a binding like that. I'm basically writing directly to the field itself. So I'm going to say get component and a result, which is the name of that field, that control, dot set value, and then it really is August. And if it's not actually August, which technically it's not, then I basically do the same thing, just with some different terminology here. So this field is bound to the view scope variable value, and this is bound to nothing, but it has that name edit result. So that's two ways to populate fields on your page. And then finally, this computed field business, this I just stole. And that's one of the nice things about JavaScript. There's so many examples out there. So I went to javascript.com or somewhere, or I guess javascriptkit.com, and I made a couple minor enhancements because they forgot a var and a couple other things, I think, in here. And that just calculates the days until Christmas. That's simple as simple gets. And that is JavaScript. Okay, Dojo. Let's talk about Dojo for a brief moment, because Dojo is this JavaScript framework that gives a whole ton of power to your web applications. And it's not IBM specific, it's not XPages specific, but XPages is fully integrated with Dojo. So it gets some things from Dojo like the date time picker, partial refresh, all sorts of these other capabilities. But Dojo contains a lot more capabilities than XPages gives you out of the box. And you can see some of these functions and features at dojotoolkit.com. So one of the ones that I just want to demo quickly is the Accordion container, which is like collapsible sections, which interestingly enough is something you can pretty much kind of do in classic notes development. So I thought this would be a good one. So what you do is the first thing you have to do in your page or custom controls, you have got to turn Dojo on. And if you go into the all properties, there's a Dojo section, and you would say Dojo parse unload, set that to true, and then Dojo theme, set that to true. Okay, now it's ready. Now Dojo is going to watch your page looking for types, Dojo types as they're kind of called today. The second thing you have to do before you can start using it, though, is you've got to tell Dojo which modules you're going to be loading, because Dojo is this big framework, and you only want to load you don't want to send the whole thing down the browser, so you just load the pieces that you need. So you can go into the resources section, and this is pretty nice in 852, and I'll show you that, and say what modules are you going to use. And we're going to say digit.layout.accordion container and digit.layout.content pane. So the accordion container is going to be the encompassing div, and then the content pane is going to be the sections inside the div. So basically the different tabs or menus. Okay, and then this is what it looks like. So you can see the accordion container div dojo type equals digit.layout.accordion container and the attributes of height. And then inside it, for each content pane, we have title, projects, tasks, other, and then that's where we put our content in. And it's important to remember that the content in here could be anything. You just type it in, it's just HTML, but you can also drop custom controls in there. So that's a nice way to kind of like separate your UI from your back end and stuff like that. Have a custom control with just links in, which you don't even have to have any styling whatsoever, but it just drops in here. Or you read from a repeat control or something like that. So let's look at a demo. Okay, so if we look at our Dojo, yeah, that is the custom control. And so if we go to, and this is 852 I'm using. So in 852, we've got this resources section here, so you can kind of add, your Dojo modules right here. But you still have to go to all properties to turn it on. So Dojo, parse unload true, and Dojo theme equals true. And then the source is really, it looks just like the slide. So here's the Dojo stuff in the source, and then here's the modules that we load. And then we get down into the Dojo type div. Now I've got this inside some Blueprint styling, just to make it work well with Blueprint. Again, there's a lot of nesting that goes on with XPages and I guess websites in general. So here's our digit.layout.accordion container div, and everything inside it then are these content panes. And you can see the titles for the content panes. And in this case here, I've got actually two custom controls. Okay, and this one is kind of meant to be in here, but I haven't quite figured out how to tell it to remember which panel is open as you go from different pages or so. So once I figure that out, then this will actually go into here, into this repeat control section. And that's it. That's Dojo. And again, what that looks like is, that's this thing right here. Okay, here's kind of like the meat of this presentation. Repeat controls. Repeat controls is one of the coolest things inside of XPages. It's like view content, but you're not married to it looking like a view anymore. The UI is totally up to you. We can do nested repeats as well, so you can have a repeat with inside a repeat. Okay, and a repeat can bind to a view or JavaScript, and that's kind of important because it's not just a view you can repeat. It could be a collection, it could be JSON, it could be a JavaScript array, it could be like a Java vector, it could be a multi-value field or so. Basically, any kind of list type data you can just throw into a repeat and iterate through it. Now, this is kind of how you set up the repeat, and you can see this is bound to view 1, and the other important field here is this one called collection name. Now, collection name is without a doubt the worst field label inside Domino Designer because it's not a collection, it's a row. And this is the variable that you put in here that you use to access the current row that it's processing. That's why a lot of us, I believe, use this row data as kind of the default variable to use to remind us that this is actually the data row variable that we're using. Okay, so when you're doing this binding and stuff, it's important to know, because it has confused me a lot in the beginning, what you're getting back. Okay, so what is row data going to be? If you use a DB column and you're doing like a DB column or DB lookup, you're actually getting back a string. Okay, so when you want to throw it into a field, you just throw in row data because it's just a string. But if you do anything with like a collection or like a view or something like that, you're getting a notes XSP view entry, which is very similar to a notes view entry. So you have to handle that a little differently. Then there's arrays, and you can use simple data binding, which is what I have in the screenshot here. But when you do the simple data binding, you're actually using the column title names from the view. So it's not the programmatic value in the view, it's actually the column title, which is not that intuitive. But that's what it is. So this zip code here is the column title of the view that I've bound to. For the view entry business, that notes XSP view entries, usually I pull that from JavaScript, and I do something like row data dot get column values, open close parens, and then 1. And it's like zero based, so 1 is actually like the second column of the view. But you can also like tag stuff on the end of that. So if you want to convert the screen to a string, you say .toString. So that's what you do. Now the next thing I want to talk about is rendering. So we're going to do a couple demos in one in this next section here. You see this visible property on a lot of these controls or so. That's the second worst label inside Notes because it's not really visible. It really means rendered or exists. And the key there is you cannot partially refresh something that doesn't exist. Because it doesn't go down to the browser, so it's not available to client-side JavaScript, and you can't do a partial refresh on it because it doesn't exist. So how do you get around that? Because a lot of times you want to hide things and show things depending on certain states of your page. Well, what I like to use is again nested panels. I use an outer panel and an inner panel. So I'll refresh the outer panel, which will always be there, and then that will redraw the inside panel. You can't you can't do a partial refresh on that inner panel if that's what is actually hiding. Okay, and what variables do you use to control this? Well, there's two good ones. One is session scope, and the other is view scope. And the way I like to use them is if I want the page to remember the state as you go through different pages, then I'll use session scope since that lives longer. But if every time I want you to like come back to that page and I want it to start all over from scratch basically, then I'll use the view scope because that resets every time you come back to the page as a shorter lifespan. So let's talk about repeat controls. Okay, so if we look at this repeat control here, all this is a repeat control. So we can make this look however we want. We've got a pager, and I've got the same filtering that I've had. Okay, so how does this guy work? Okay, so here's a custom control, and this is bound to the same data that I've been binding to throughout the presentation, and the same filtering business. So the filtering works the same way. So that's all done for me. So then this repeat control, if we look on this, is bound to just view 1, and I'm set a repeat limit of 30, which is the default, and I've given a name of row data. So how do we access the information on the fields? When we drop our controls on, it's just simple binding. It's row data. It's not view 1, it's row data, and then bind to the name in the view column titles. And it's just that easy. And then the pager, which is something that's really kind of hard to do in classic Domino, at least I never knew how to do it. You just drop the pager control, which I believe is a core control. Yeah, maybe I'm wrong. Yeah, here it is, pager. So you would drop that on, and then you just tell it which one to attach to. Well, let's attach to view 1. And you can change all the stylings and custom your stylings and all that stuff. So that's kind of cool. And that's, oops, oh look, you can even see it change. I didn't know you could do that. Okay, so that's just a simple repeat. It doesn't get much easier than that. We'll say no to that. Now, if we look at repeat 2, now what this is a repeat with inside a repeat, and I'm using some control over the rendering to show or hide the appropriate data. So this is a repeat inside a repeat of states, and I'm doing this expand and collapse business. So let's look and see how that works. Okay, so again, same thing. Well, this is going to be a little different actually. So this is the first repeat. Okay, let's start again here. This custom control has 2 data sources bound to it. One is view state, and then view 1. So what I'm doing for the first repeat is I'm doing a DB lookup, and I guess I'm not even using that first data source. So I probably shouldn't even mention that. So what I'm doing here is basically a DB column by state. Okay, so this is how you do a DB column in XPages. It kind of wants the database information, the server and database name to be inside an array. And then I'm just telling it, what view and what column. So I've got a view of states, I'm bringing this in column 1. So what this is string, right? So if I look at this field here, all it is state data, which is my collection name over here. So that's all it is. There's no tags or anything needed. I mean, I guess I could do a 2 uppercase if I wanted, or 2 lowercase, state data dot, but I didn't care here. And then inside this repeat here, this is the second repeat, what I'm doing is I'm doing the view 1, get all entries by key, and then I'm passing in that the parent repeat, state data. So that's how I make sure I get all the Alaska people underneath Alaska. And then to reference the fields here, since that's a little different, that's going to be give me back view entries, is where name data, and name data is the collection name for this view. So name data, get column values, and then the column. And this view is actually by state, which makes sense. So this is column 0. Okay, that's a repeat within a repeat. Not that hard, and not a lot of programming. Now, the expand and collapse business, if we look at this button here, expand, and we look at events, what this does is view scope put, and I create this variable called show detail, and if I click expand, I set it to true. If I click collapse, I set it to false, and I do a partial update of detail outer. So if we look at detail outer, that's this kind of outer panel right here. The repeat is right here, and the repeat is what has the visible, and sometimes Domino Designer doesn't show it, but the visible property is computed. Okay, so this is inside the repeat. So I'm not refreshing the repeat, I'm refreshing the outer panel of it. And if we look at this formula, all this is reading in that variable, show detail. Again, not a lot of code to get some kind of significant functionality. And that is this repeat. Now if we look at this repeat, number 3, this is a repeat that doesn't look anything like a repeat. It's the exact same thing. It's a repeat with inside a repeat. Now I removed the expand and collapse business, and all this is CSS styling. And I could click on these and stuff like that, but that's it. So that's the great thing about repeat controls is the UI is totally up to you. Okay, here we go. Buckle your seatbelts. What we're going to do here is we're going to look at a custom control. We're going to tie all these things together, and we're going to look at a custom control that accepts a parameter that's a server-side JavaScript object that's inside a repeat control. Now why? Well, what I wanted to do is I wanted to have the insides of a repeat control be standalone. So I wanted to pass the data into them. So I didn't want to predetermine how the insides of a repeat control would be gathered. You know, I might want to get contacts by state. Might want to get contacts by a help ticket or by priority or whatever it is or so. But I wanted to use the same insides of our repeat control, those little blocky things, over and over again. Because again, I want to be able to collect these either through a collection or a notes view or a JSON array or something like that. So let's look at this. And again, it's kind of going to look the same as this. Oh no, actually it doesn't. So here it is. This is using server-side JavaScript objects inside a repeat control. And on this page, I actually have 2 repeat controls. Okay, so I've got this one up here, and I've got this one down here. And I know this looks ugly. Someday it won't. But this repeat control is getting these people by passing in units, right? If I come down here, I'm this repeat control, I'm getting these people passing in a unique key that's on each document. But this inside business is the exact same control for both of them. Okay, so it's flexible. So let's see how that looks. Okay, so first thing I want to show you is the actual insides of the repeat control, which I have in a custom control called contact block generic. Okay, so there's no data bound on here. So how do I get the data in here? Well, what I did was I defined a property. Okay, and this property, now you can do a lot of properties. You can do strings, you can do all sorts of things. This one is actually a Java language object. So even though I'm only using JavaScript as my language, I have to use this Java language object to make it work. Don't ask me why, but it works. So how do I reference that Java language, this object from server-side JavaScript that I pass in? Well, when you do a property definition, you have this thing called composite data. And to reference it, I've got composite data, then the name of the object, which is contact object, and then the name of the function that I created, get first name, get last name, and get full name. And again, I can do anything I want. It's very similar to a custom class in LotusScript. So that is the insides of the repeat. Okay, now if I look at the outside, so here's the custom control that's inside the repeat. So the repeat here is just doing this view 1. So this repeat is just bound to view 1, right? This is the second repeat, and that's bound to view 1 also, which might be a bad demo, but let's see what it looks like. And this field here is where I'm getting row data, get document, get universal ID. Let's make that a little bigger. To string, because I wanted it to be a string. So I'm returning to this control, row data, get document, get universal ID, to string. And I just have this here so I can see what it looks like. Okay? So inside this repeat properties, this is my contact object that I defined inside the generic guy. And what I'm doing here is I'm passing in that, I'm saying it's going to be a new contact document, and I'm passing in row data dot get document dot get universal ID, just what I had in that field, so that computer field, so I could see what it is. So that is feeding into my object. Down here for this repeat, again, this is like the debugging field, and what I'm doing here is first creating a variable called v, and here I'm going to actually use key data, and key data is the name of my collection for this repeat, where the row data was the first one. And I'm going to use this key data, get document, get item value, the number, which is a field on the document. I'm going to convert it to string and pass that in. And again, if we look at the actual custom control, it looks the exact same way as the other one did, with just that slightly different syntax. So I'm first getting the number, and I'm saying return a new contact document, and I'm passing in that key value, the string version of it. Okay, and that's all there is to it. So now, what does the server-side JavaScript look like? And if we look under resources, we're including contact object.jss. So if we look at our resources, oops, that's not resources, that's code. Big difference. Contact object. Okay, so this is basically the object, or very similar, the equivalent to the LotusScript custom class. So I'm creating a variable inside here called contact document, and it's going to have, everything's going to be wrapped in a function. I think this is kind of called a closure pattern, the way this works. So the way this works is everything in the top section here is private. Then everything in this return section here is going to be available. It's going to like live longer, so it's going to be available outside the object. So how does this server-side JavaScript work? Well, the first section here is all about just getting a handle on the database. Okay, and then I passed in that key, and this is kind of like that snippet from that slide. Clean that up a little bit. So we kind of looked at this once already. So if it's a unit, then I'm going to set up these variables. And if it's not, then I'm going to set up these variables a little differently. And now I am building inside here. I'm getting a handle on the document object. I probably shouldn't do that from a performance perspective. I should only get this if I really need it and try and get as much data from the view or at creation time. But for now, I'm getting a handle on the object here. So just be careful and pay attention to the performance. And then in this return section, then this is where I'm creating my functions. So I've got a get unit function where I'm returning the unit that I've created up here. And there's a contact key where I've got a contact key up here, etc. And here's a function, the get full name, where I'm combining this get first name and this get last name. And that's it. So now that object can be passed around into the repeat controls or used elsewhere, and it populates the repeat, and it does work. I've got a project due for OpenNTF at some point where I'm actually using this in a task time tracking application. So that, to me, I don't know. That's kind of cool. Okay, and that's the final demo that I have for you there for this show. If you have any questions, here's my contact information. Thank you for making this far, and I really appreciate it. And I hope you got some value out of it. Have a good day.